Yep.
That's good. Sound works.
Yep, lovely. And you want to record this, Jeff?
I'm recording it.
Great, cool.
I'm slowly advancing in technology. Hello, Satya. I'm very happy everybody could come. The few people that came this time, and I hope more people can come because my mission is to try to make these satsangs more available to us and try to bring them more into our life. And how do we touch the Guru? How do we find Guru Shakti in our life? How do we bring grace into our life? I remember him saying, very simply but very movingly, he said, how can I turn my gaze to you unless you turn your gaze to me? And we connect with our Guru by sitting in the presence. That's what they call it in other groups, just sitting within Shakti. That's what we call it in our group. That's a very powerful method. But he is a very, what he would call a pure channel. A very pure channel to that kind of grace, to that kind of divinity. And so is his face, his look, so is his voice, and also so is his satsangs, his actual teachings. And I think all of us have been meditating for years. We have a very good sense of what some of the concepts like non-attachment is. We have a lot of some sense of what Guru Shakti might be, some sense of what devotion might be, and I'm trying to pick some satsangs that I think are really pretty difficult. Ones that, as he once told us very clearly, he said, he expected us to really ask, what did Gururaj mean when he said this? What does he mean by this? He really meant us to discuss these things. So I picked what I think is a pretty tough satsang. It's kind of confusing. It's US 86032, and if you look at the satsang, there's this beautiful little arti, a little poem to Laureata that he gives at the beginning of it, and Raman has actually put it on video, so you can see him reciting this. I'm just sorry the sound quality isn't that good on the recording. But he recited it arti. Then he gives a very beautiful little summation about the stages of the path. Or he didn't use word stage. Actually, he did use the word stages. First, we have dualistic worship. Then we have semi-monistic worship. That's what he said, where we feel like there's a piece of the divine or there's a spark of the divine within each one of us. He said that is semi-monistic. Then he said there's the stage where we realize that I and the Father, I and the divine, or I am the goddess are the same. I am divine. He said that is non-dual. Now, that's actually a little preface, I think, to the topic and what he said the satsang about. And the way grace works is wonderful and mysterious. And I actually went to a Vedanta lecture, which I think bored Laureata near to death, but I enjoyed it. And there was a guy giving classic Indian philosophy, and he touched on a lot of the concepts that Gururaj is directly referring to. But Gururaj did not want us, I don't think, to get fixated on Hindu deities and fancy yogic terminology and chakra stuff. He used all that stuff, but he wanted to put it in our vernacular, in our culture, and not make it Indian so much. So I'm going to try to not get too geeky about it and not go into these definitions of these terms, but I want to reference some of the Indian philosophy that he's touching upon, because guess what? It's not just ideas. These things actually exist, and Gururaj expected us to experience these things, to make them our own. So I hope, Satya, did you get a chance to actually read the satsang? Okay, you're going to go through it cold turkey. That's fine, because we all did when we first heard it. So cold turkey it is. It is reaching the state of no name and form. Back in the day, when they were around, the Chelas were around the Guru, there was some of us who had a really good sense of that. There were other of us who were faking it, because this was just something that in the air. A lot of people were talking about it. And the person who's asking the question, Satya, do you have that? Do you have it in front of you now? No? Okay, so I'll try to be clear. The questioner was actually Mataji. And Mataji was treated as sort of a saint within our group. She was supposedly the one who really gets it. So she asked a very subtle question, which I've only recently begun to realize what she was talking about. This is the question that Mataji asked. She said, Guruji, and I'll use Mataji's accent. Do you want me to use Mataji accent? Okay. Gururaj, if and when meditation leads us to state of no form, no name, and no senses, how do we know we've been there? And how do we translate that state into daily life? Did everybody get that question? Now, this gets us into some dicey territory because we've had several members of the group, I hope I've never done it, who go into descriptions of advanced states of meditation. Gururaj is guilty of it. Shame on him, of saying, I see the distant stars, the planets, the galaxies, and all that. And there's lots of people getting into, because this is him, Mataji's asking, what does it mean to go beyond ordinary sense consciousness, where we're basically in touch of what we see and what we can touch and what we experience? And how do we even know we've been there? If we have no senses, she used no form, no name, and no senses. Well, no form means no sense of reality. No name means no consciousness in the ordinary discursive intellect, the way we normally think of things. And no senses means no sense awareness. So she said, how do you know you've been there? Now, the first question is that what we're supposed to be doing? Is that what Gururaj is expecting from us? Are we supposed to go in this weird blitzed out state where there's like nothing? There's nothing there. There's we're not thinking about anything and we don't have any senses? Okay, that's one big question mark. The other one is, how do you know you've done that? And finally, what on earth does that have to do with everyday life? Why on earth would we want that? Gururaj actually made fun of what many people thought this was about. He said, if you want that state of avidya, of lack of knowledge, what this sounds like, what Tamaji's asking, where you're like gone, you're blanked out. He says it can be done very easily with a hammer. He says he can give you that kind of samadhi very easily, just buck you out, and he's right. All this to say, and this is a preface, he's talking about a state of consciousness, and he seems to say that he's expecting us to be evolving towards the state of consciousness, where it is not the usual, what the term is, sem, that's the Tibetan term for discursive intellect. That's where we're sort of the internal monologues going on, and we're having a good time or a bad time, and we're talking about so-and-so and wish we would do this, and there's things going on mentally in our consciousness. And we're in some other state. Gururaj was adamant the purpose of our life was to experience self-realization. What is self-realization? Is it a wonderful, crazy state? Gururaj seems to say, yes, you have to have that experience to know what it is. This is another satsang. But he also seemed to say that, I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, I've lost my train of thought. I was looking like this. I'm going to go read this. To have that mysterious state of awareness that he talks, self-realization. He said, and you'll remember this from other satsang, it has something to do with total integration. Do you remember that? He said he integrate all the levels of our being, as if he's saying we are a fragmented sensibility now. We're out of touch with ourselves. And a lot of us ask, what are you talking about, Gururaj? I know where I am. I mean, I'm sitting here in this chair and I'm listening to you and I'm trying to, figure out what you're talking about. What do you talk about being fragmented person, out of touch with oneself? So that's what he's getting at with the first question. Here's his response to Mataji's question. How do we translate that state into daily life? So Gururaj starts out and he says, beautiful. Do we really know now, even with the senses, where we are? Do we? We're at this conference center, that we know. But where are we really? Do we know that? You don't know that until you've been totally integrated and have been totally centered. Only then can you know where we are. Now, he's a genius. That is his whole satsang, and that's a very, very good summation of what integration, self-realization, and centering is about. He says you don't know that until you've been totally integrated and totally centered. What do you get centered in? I have an answer, but I'm going to leave it an open question. What is he talking about? And what does he mean that you don't even know where you are until you've been totally integrated? What is he talking about? Then can you only know where you are? So he goes on. He says the senses will tell us of the environmental happenings, the things around us. That's what our sensory apparatus is. This is helped, of course, by the karma indriyas, which mean the organs of actions, limb, hands, arms, and all that. And then you have the janindriyas, the organs of knowledge or perception. They cooperate with the karmendriyas to give the senses their momentum so that it is translated into action. Those in the audience like, what the heck? It's a tip-off, by the way. He's talking about hardcore Indian philosophy. How do we even know we're here in the world? We only have two ways of knowing. One way is our mind. And by the way, when we're dreaming, we're in total illusion. We're in the total dream state, but we still see objects in front of us. But we're not using the kamendriyas and janendriyas. What those are is the organs, the normal five senses, and the janendriyas are the ones like, the karmendriyas are things like our hands, our feet, our body, our tactile sense of environment and the world. That's how we normally know the world. Little key. He hasn't gone into it. He's saying, well, the question is, just because you're involved with those senses, do you know where you are? Through the higher forms of meditation, you reach a stage where you can go beyond the senses. Now, going beyond the senses means that you've not destroyed the senses. You're only going beyond them. If I have a staircase here and I climb up to that roof, that doesn't mean that I've destroyed all the rooms that are below the top of the building. They're going to remain there. This means that I've now reached the top of the roof, and I have a greater view of all the senses that are below me. Now, that is a tip-off. Gururaj says we don't blank out. I don't know if I should tell you guys this, but for years, when I would sit with AMS meditation, I blanked out. And I did this for maybe about 10 years. Then somebody told me that, you know what? That is actually a dangerous stage in meditation. That's not what meditation is about. Meditation is to stay in contact with consciousness. Don't blank out. And I spent quite a few years doing it. It's one of the reasons why I went to study other forms of meditation. So he just told us it's not to destroy the senses. You're not supposed to blank out. The senses will remain, but they're going to be, somehow they're going to be different. He says here, to reach the highest form of meditation is not the destruction of the senses. The senses will remain. But by reaching that higher stage, the senses will be guided differently. They will have a totally different perspective. And what this will take away from you is the craving, the mother of all miseries. Almost all of our thinking process is devoted to craving. I wish I was doing something else. I wish I was more awake. I want something to eat. It's time to go do something. All that's devoted with desire, with craving, the desire to be doing or be someone or be someplace else than where you are. He's saying that when you get to this higher stage, the sense apparatus, our touch, our body senses, and our physical senses, our eyes, ear, nose, are going to be guided differently. By the way, what guide the senses according to Indian philosophy? Manas, the mind, the intellect. You use your mind to guide. I want to, by the way, that implies the ego self. I'm hungry, or I got to go to graduation, or somebody's got to eat. I mean, that's all. The mind guides the senses. What am I looking at? I'm looking at a bird, a car, a window. That's the mind guiding the senses. Now he's talking about how ordinary consciousness works. About, for most of us, 100% of the time, we're guided, we're overwhelmed by craving. He says people suffer in this world because of craving. There are many objects of craving. It doesn't necessarily mean food. I might brought up food. You might crave a lobster dinner. You might crave a chicken or a turkey or pork chops or whatever, or a huge retirement portfolio. You might crave, but craving has so many other forms. You crave for wealth. You crave for relationships. You crave for this, that, and the other. Everything is based upon craving. Yes, that is. And it's, as he said, it's the mother of all miseries. And these cravings are accentuated by the senses and their counterparts. Normally we use our sense consciousness to get ice cream, to get away from things we don't like. Our sense consciousness is in the service of our addictions, our craving for this, that, and the other. And of course, I won't go into the whole Buddha shtick with craving, but the problem with craving is we almost never get what we want, and when we do get what we want, we lose it. And we often get what we don't want. So in the higher forms of so the higher forms of meditation, you lose craving. You lose lust, for example, which is also a craving. You crave for what you want to do, but you can do the same thing without craving. Then you know that you've reached a step higher. Now, I think he picked, for the audience at the time, the most psychologically gripping and engaging and most alarming sense of sensory awareness or sensory craving in the world. We can laugh about food, but when people talk about sex, people's ears perk up. So they say, you can make sensual love. You can have sensual love with your beloved, and the act would seem the same as in divine love. This is very interesting. And yet it's the same act. One is filled with craving and animal passion, and the other one is also filled with passion, but it's divine passion, where you want to find mergence with that object, with the beloved, so that the object and the subject become one. That is divine love beyond craving. He deliberately chose something that would really trigger us. And he told us, guess what? If you are established in self, or you're aware of this larger consciousness, even sexual love can be guided differently than it would be by craving. It can be a different kind of experience. So you can still do the same thing. It's like the old Zen story where the Chela was asked by the Zen master, what did you do before you became enlightened? And the Zen master replied, well, I chopped wood, I made the fire, and I cooked food. Oh, well now what do you do after you're enlightened? So the Zen master replied, well, I chop wood, I make fire, and I cook food. The same action, even after reaching enlightenment. Gururaj shocked all of us and me by acting like an ordinary man. Actually, that's not true. He was not nearly as inhibited as I am or ordinary people. He was outrageous. If he felt like doing something, he just did it. And it was amazing. So he's no monk where he talks about like the Vedanta people. He says, you must conquer craving for food. You must eat simple food. It's like, no sex, and you mustn't be attached to money. It's like, give me a break. Gururaj is not claiming that, but he's saying somehow those ordinary desires we have are going to be guided differently. But the action, though it be the same to ordinary eyes, would assume a great difference to somebody who's enlightened. Before, the wood was just wood, and the fire was just fire, and the food was just food. He's talking about the Zen master now. But now the wood becomes God, and through the wood, fire is made. And the wood is sacrificed to the fire, which is also God. And the food cooked on the fire is also divine, also God. So the wood, the fire, and the food become divine. And you see the divinity. That is when you rise above the senses and become enlightened. So the wood and the fire and the food assumes a different perspective altogether. He just told us that the state of enlightenment is where everything in our experience we experience as divine and divinity. There's no such thing as good and bad actions. It's all divine. This is really important. And it knocks all the people in the orange robes and the white robes and the black robes and all that stuff. Just forget that stuff. Ordinary life can be divine. After reaching the highest stage of meditation, you will want to know what happens to you. How can I know that I'm beyond the senses? Well, you can't know. You can't know that you've transcended. You can only judge it by comparison to what you regarded a certain object to be before enlightenment and what that same object seems to you after enlightenment. He just told us that when you're in that state of meditating itself, the highest stage of meditation, whatever that is, he says at that time, you aren't going to know that you're enlightened. In fact, he's kind of implying in a way you don't even know you're enlightened. But your attitudes towards ordinary sensual world, your ordinary environment is completely different once you're enlightened. So then we want to know, okay, what's that like then, Gururaj? What kind of state are you talking about? He said, the mind will analyze. He said, your mind will still work. You'll try, what did happen to me? What's going on? But when you're beyond the mind and have transcended the limitations of the mind and have become limitless, then how can the finite mind ever comprehend that which is infinite? That knowledge of enlightenment is not confined to the mind because it cannot be confined. It cannot be imprisoned. When that stage is reached, it is nirvana, enlightenment, self-realization. Self-realization is when the self realizes itself. And the real self within you is beyond the mind and the senses. So therefore, it remains that self and exists in its own power. That is that's the whole thing. That's a paragraph, tell you the truth, you should spend a long time with. He's saying you aren't going to sit in your ordinary framework of figuring things out. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. Oh, I know what that reminds me of. He says, forget it. Your mind's not going to be able to get it at all. He's saying your ordinary experience of the world is not going to be able to get it at all. He also talked about going, at this time, transcended the limitation of the mind and become limitless. What on earth does that mean, limitless? This is where we get into people talking about, oh, I went beyond the galaxies and I could read people's minds. And people, I think that's a lot of hooey. So what is he talking about? This is interesting. This is where he's getting into philosophy. He said, everything you see around you in the world requires an external power. But when a person is realized, he does not need any external power to make the car of his life go. It just runs. You don't need to fill it with gas. It runs on its own. Therefore, we call it self-existent, non-dependent. In that non-dependency, you enjoy everything that you have done before, but in a totally independent way instead of a dependent way. What the heck is he talking about? He's talking about, as the Gita says, first be established in self and then perform action. A person who is established in self, who has identified, I am not the me I thought I was. I am Brahman. I am the Absolute. I am Shiva. I am divine. The person who knows that because they've experienced where the ordinary self and beingness has disappeared and awareness itself exists, as Gururaj once said, in its own self-effulgence, in its own light. To be non-dependent means that I don't care what my name is. I don't care if there's a check in the bank because it's all frickin' illusion. It's a real illusion. I still have to go to the bathroom. I still have to eat. But this is simply the gunas playing through me. This is simply this beautiful illusion. This is the goddess performing action through this limitless awareness which I am. I'm going to play out the drama that I've been given by my karma, but I know that I am not that being. I am no longer fooled, that I am limited by time and space. I am Satchitananda. I am infinite knowledge, bliss, and awareness. Now, I'm sorry I just gave my little bit on it, but that's what he's talking about. You are dependent on this, that, and the other. You want people's approval. You need money in the bank. You're scared about getting cancer. You've got all these problems. That's being dependent. For example, this camera won't work if you don't have electricity. So your camera is dependent upon electricity, like you're dependent upon money. And even if electricity is there and the camera is there, then both of these things are still dependent upon Terry, who's doing the photography. And that's still not enough. Terry is also dependent upon some power of knowing the machine and how to operate that machine. So one dependency just leads to another. We live a conditioned life. This is what we mean that we're surrounded by our attachments. I can't make it unless somebody loves me or somebody feeds me. It's not going to work. He's saying you can be in a state where none of that impinges on your sense of autonomy. You're free. But in that self-realized state, the camera exists on its own. And within its lens, the entire universe is reflected and seen. The lens has become the universe, so that existence experiences itself. There's no outside experiencer to judge it, to say that I am self-realized. Why would there be no outside, like why could you not tell yourself that you're self-realized? Because you're everything. There's no observer observing something else. There's just one thing. Everything is enlightenment. Everything is divine. There is no outside power to tell you that you're realized, but you just know experientially that you are realized. Your measure can only be that calmness, that laughter bubbling you by that cup that floweth over. By the way, all of us, including this entity right here, ego consciousness, sometimes like to say, oh, play the game of let's be spiritually aware. Let's be hip to this and let's pretend we're going to be, spiritually advanced. Or it's a little like pretending to be, when you go to a job interview, hi, I'm up and I know what I'm doing and, I can tell you all the answers. It's faking it. Gururaj is talking about something where you're not trying to do anything. You just are it. You're not trying anything. You don't need to anymore because there's nothing to get. You don't need anything. You have everything. There's Ram Dass's guru, Neem Karoli Baba. Does people know who he is? Neem Karoli Baba? He used to say, I have all the money in America. Gururaj would act like that. Just tell yourself, I have all the money in the world, but I don't need to buy anything, so it doesn't matter. Why not have everything? It's all an idea anyway. Why don't you just say, I have all the money in the world? Doesn't matter. When you observe these things, you will know that you're existing in existence by existence itself, without any form of dependency. Dependency implies a bondage. The camera had to have the stand, so it has a bondage with a stand. You're attached. And the tripod and the camera is dependent upon Terry to push all the right buttons. And Terry is dependent upon that energy to make him press the buttons. But what is there that could press that energy, which is divinity, to function? Nothing, nothing at all. It's functioning by itself all the time. Do you see? Now he's getting into a strange analogy here. You have your watch or a clock and you wind it. It runs for 24 hours. There has to be a winder of the clock. And that is in the form of dualism, where you have the watch and the winder. You have that force, the power, and the object of power that winds the watch. In 24 hours, the watch stops because the winder has not turned the thing to make it tick. What the heck is he talking about? He's talking about you. I got to get up in the morning and go to work. If I don't go to graduation, I'm going to get in trouble. I've got to do this. You ought to do this. Shame on you for not doing that. You're an idiot. You're a genius. It's like you're trying to wind, your ego self is pretending like it's the winder of your life. Gururaj is talking about a state where that's gone. You just are life. Whatever happens is great. It's all divine. The winder disappears. But that independent existence requires nothing else for it to tick. It just keeps on ticking on and on. It's like that quartz watches that you don't need to wind at all. It winds by itself. It just carries on. And if it's a good watch, it will tick for years and years and years. And you don't need to touch the winder. So that energy that's in the quartz that makes the world go around. You said, what energy is it that makes God work? How does God work? He said, there's no energy in the quartz at all. Because the quartz itself is that energy. And the quartz is not aware of the energy it needs to wind the watch. God is not aware of being God. God is God is God is God. It just is. Do you remember Gururaj talking about the isness? That's Brahman. That's Brahman without attributes. Do you know the old adage that mind plus man, mind plus God equals man. Man minus mind equals God. You, with your ego-driven personality, you experience yourself as a limited being. Guess what? Everything that's going on right now is your personal dream. You've made up every bit of it. It's happening just to you and just for you. Similarly, that energy that is forever neutral is just there. And in its stillness, it has its functions of making you live, making your senses do the thing it wants to do. But when we create blockages by our senses, by our rationalizations, by our minds, then the energy finds blockages. It's not given full vent to act on its own and be itself. That's being the source of yourself. He's saying, when you give full vent to act on God's own and for God to be God, that is being the source of yourself. That means that any frickin' thing that happens is great. You've got no issue with anything. Going to work? Fine. Dying from cancer? Fine. Feeling pain? Okay. I'll be miserable. That's fine. This is a level, that's what it means to be enlightened. It means accepting everything. Because you are everything. What do you got problems with? And I'm almost done here. I can't finish the whole thing. The whole spiritual path is for one to remove the obstacles of the mind. Underline that 10 times. The whole spiritual path is for one to remove the obstacles of the mind. Not to destroy the obstacles, but to remove them from the path. Did you know you can still have all your hang-ups and you can be enlightened? It's even possible to be a jerk and be enlightened. It's not like religious people are goody-goody, like those nice Buddhists. They wouldn't hurt anybody. It's like, let's not hurt the fly. And it's like, come on. You want to feed them chicken nuggets. It's like, lighten up. It's that pretense. And he's not talking about being pretentious. He's talking about being real. Everything is exactly the way it is, and it's great. So you push them aside. The road is clear, but there was a storm this morning, and a tree has fallen across the road so that you can't pass it with your car. So what do? You got some help, or if you're a strong man, you move the tree. You're not destroying the tree. You put it on one side, and you get into your car, and you move on to one of Gururaj's courses. So there's no destruction at all. Everything is eternal. Nothing is ever destroyed. It's only dissolved into its original elements. But the energy is still there, and that energy exists by itself. And that is the meaning of true existence. Do you know what happens when you fix a problem in your life in ordinary egoistic consciousness? You just get another problem. You work really hard, you make enough to eat, to finally have a decent income, then you get sick. You'll just have another problem. The ego, when it tries to solve everything like that, by the way, you got to do it. It's your life, it's God's life, so why not just live it? But it's not going to fix anything because it just moves the energy around. What Gururaj is talking about, fine. Just, you know, you got to just move it out of the way. You ain't going to get rid of it. You're not it anyway. Just do it. Just live. He said that's the meaning of true existence. It's 1 minute over. Let's see. Let me read one more paragraph. When we say I exist, what do you mean by that? You can say I exist because your mind is still functioning, and your mind recognizes the various functioning that are within yourself and outside of yourself. When it all is put together, it all boils down to the ego self. And the ego says, I exist. Yes, the ego has existence, but it's not an independent existence. It has to rely on an outside energy for it to function. Your ego self is, I got something else from it, it exists purely in the light and as like a little machine run by God. And as long as you identify with that ego self, you're going to be a little machine being run by all the nonsense that runs in your life. All you have to do is realize in the depths of your being that you're not that ego self, that you're something else. And then you become actually, he talks more, this is good. Oh, well. Yeah, he's just talking about the ego self and finding the source. At the beginning, this is what Gururaj wants to do. He wants to free us from this nonsense that we think we are. In the middle, when Gururaj gets harder, all Gururaj wants to do is to free us from that nonsense that we falsely believe we are. At the final stage, Gururaj wants to realize that we and the Guru, we are Gururaj. We are divine. We actually have the inner Guru to realize, oh my God, Gururaj showed up in my life. I made him. Not the ego self, but God is manifesting. And I get to play along with God. There's more to this satsang, and I hope I touched on it. I'm going to mention, oh no, I'm not going to mention. The Hindu Indian philosophy can get complicated on this. Look up Wikipedia and study Brahman, Atman, and also what happens in what they talk about, the perfect existence or the pure existence state. I'm going to give you a hint. When you go into deep sleep and you're unconscious, are you aware or not? Most of the time we think no. When you're in deep sleep, you're not aware. Your mind is not functioning. Your ego self is not functioning, but guess what? You're still aware. You can read about this in the Ramana Maharshi. You come out of sleep feeling rested and like, boy, I had a great sleep. You were aware that you were asleep. So something in you was aware. What was aware? God. Pure existence was aware. And God brings you back into consciousness to have more fun, making you go through all the stuff that we have to go through. So I hope you can read the rest of the satsang. There's about 10 more pages. It gets better and better. I've got 2 more pages, but I'm going to end. It's at 4 after. Please, I hope you can read the rest of it. And Satya, if you can find it on the internet, download it and then look through it. And I even included some notes at the end about karmindriyas and janindriyas, and look up Brahman states. But guess what? Gururaj, he says it in a user-friendly fashion, and he's trying so hard to wake us up from this suffering that we think we are. Oh, anything else, or are we done?
This was great. I have to say, I listened to this satsang last week, and just hearing your insight on it has brought it into much clearer relief and understanding.
I'm grateful to hear you say that, and
it's a big one, and just hearing your take on it is incredibly helpful.
And maybe it's just me, but I think every one of us will have something we think is the core of Gururaj's teachings. But basically, Gururaj is the liberator. And I sometimes think of him as white Tara. He's there to try to free us from ourselves, from our own ignorance and our own cruelty to ourselves. He just wants us to have a good time. He so much wants us to be joyous. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Satya, for coming. Thanks, everybody. And Benton, give me some tips on how we can get more folks to tune into this thing.
We'll think about it.
All right.
Awesome, because it's so worthwhile.
I think so, because I love the Guru and I want all him to liberate beings. That's what all he wants to do, is to liberate beings.
Yep.
Okay, sweeties, I'll see you again in a month.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right. See you, Satya.
Namaste.
All right, namaste. Bye.